Hello everyone and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry, a fan channel where everything Dragalia Lost can be found. This video is going to contain my reaction to Chapter 21, Part 1 of the main campaign. I'm also briefly going to discuss a new version update that came out in Dragalia Lost this past week, and an announcement by the game's director about the future of the game as a whole come November later this year. So let's start off with the version update, since that should be pretty short and sweet. This was a smaller update, but we still did get a free 10-fold voucher out of it. And the main two changes are, one, there are new affinities on Wyrmprints that allow you to apply affliction resistances which weren't previously available through the affinity system. So that means things like freeze res, bog res, poison, blindness even. So pretty good to see those applied to some Wyrmprints which didn't have any type of affinity before. Happy with that update. It's actually kind of nice to be able to kit out adventurers that may have struggled otherwise, especially now with how many Wyrmprint slots that we have. So like to see that change, as small as it may seem. And the second change is also something kind of small, but to the bleeding mechanic, it's now easier to maintain 3 stacks of bleed with the way that bleed works now. It's essentially reapplied, so if your timer on a previous stack is running out and you reapply it, even if you can't go past the maximum of 3, you do reapply the time limit on that debuff. So that's a nice little small change that should help some bleed adventurers. That's pretty much it for the version update. Pretty short one this time, but it makes sense with this being August and us being about a month away from the game's 3rd anniversary at the end of September. Now let's start talking about the latest chapter of the story. So this one was a doozy. A lot happened in this chapter. I don't know where I want to start. So I guess we can start with the battle that I just showed off a moment ago against Hybernhilda. The beginning of this chapter has the party intercepted by Jinlorda, and we see Jinlorda's power of apotheosis. So I've always heard that word to mean sort of the creation of a god. In Jinlorda's case, it allows him to use his metamorphosis to transform into the form of Hybernhilda, and we actually have to battle him in that form. It's pretty interesting to kind of get his philosophy. He seems to have an interpretation of Nedric's beliefs that is a little bit narrower, I would say. So his interpretation is really around the incidence of strength in the world, and strength versus weakness, and how the strong have privilege to trample over the weak, and how the weak are not able to fend for themselves. He also goes into the origin of dragon and fairy kinds and how they're related, and yet the strength of dragons has made them revered, and the weakness of fairies has made them isolated and ignored. So it's kind of interesting to hear his loyalty to Nedric and just get more on his perspective. I think that fierce devotion stems from their childhood together, and it's kind of cool how he stands up to us, and eventually we're able to defeat him and decide to move through, and we end up talking to Nedric, and this is where we get another huge lore drop. So from Nedric and from the sacred tree, which apparently is animate, it's able to talk to us, we find out about the origins of the world of Dragalia Lost. And in the beginning, there were apparently 2 different sort of creator gods, one called the progenitor being the human of beginning, and the other called the origin, known as the dragon of the beginning. The origin really believed in the possibility of its own, or impossibility, and the idea that free will would be the means of its creation to determine its fate. Whereas the progenitor was sort of more into predeterminism, wanted everything orderly, very much like a certain dragon that we know from recent events. I guess they're not that recent anymore, but a dragon we've done battle with in the form of Alberius. Of course, I'm talking about Elysium. So we get this backstory. We also find out that apparently the progenitor was sealed away in the other world and the origin's body was lost. It's implied by Nedric that the origin is Bahamut, the worm of Genesis, and he's trying to reforge his pact with Bahamut to protect free will in the world. And now, I had never been the biggest Elysium fan, from like an anime standpoint, that if there's some kind of supreme being that is challenging the notion of free will or self-determination, they're always kind of the bad guy in an anime. Like, it's always the willpower and the friendship to overcome type of deal that you put your faith in. And so when I saw how austere Elysium was in his way of thinking about the world, I kind of had the sense that he was ultimately a bad guy. And even though when we, as Alberius, battled him, it was more of a trial situation, I think now we finally see that, well, whether or not he's good or bad, he's definitely aligned with the progenitor, as he then shows up to interrupt the pact that Nedric is trying to form with Bahamut via the Sacred Tree, via the Dawn Shard. And ultimately he's unsuccessful, but he does sort of, controlling the world's mana, start to paralyze everybody and make it so they can't move. And that's where something very strange happens. Yudin turns into Beast Volk. And so please forgive me if I'm forgetting any other things that happened in this conversation. There was just a lot in this chapter, a lot of free will versus determinism type of philosophy discussion. Obviously, with it being an anime, I think that the free will side is probably the one likely to triumph, or I should say anime inspired. Anyway, Yudin transforms into the form of Beast Volk, and we get this really sweet artwork of Volk in the background, or Yudin, I suppose, with Valix, Jinlorda, I think Gatov, and Nedric. And when Yudin makes that transformation, they're freed and they're able to actually attack and presumably defeat Elysium. So all this is happening, and at the very end, people show up and say, you can't let Nedric form a pact with Bahamut. It appears to be Ferris and Baron, based on the end of the chapter and the preview for the next one. At first, before I saw Ferris's picture, I thought maybe it could be Ilya and Mordecai or something like that. But essentially, we defeated Elysium. And I have no idea about the Volk transformation. To me, it almost seems like, is Volk, specifically in beast form, going to be our next Gala Dragon? Or maybe Elysium will be our next Gala Dragon, because we were due for one at the end of this month on the Summon Showcase. So that's all I can imagine at this point, is one of those two. I mean, maybe this is a way to get the beast forms of the Agito to be summonable, which would be kind of sweet, honestly. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the banner is. We should know more on that very soon. That's pretty much all I have to say about the chapter. I'd be curious to read your comments below. The last thing I want to briefly touch on is the announcement about the game's future. So there was a news post that from November on, the game's development cycle will be slightly reduced. We won't be getting as many new events, and we are also told to rest assured that plans are in place for the 3rd anniversary on Bond and beyond. I'm really not stressed about this or not worried. It's been hard keeping up with the game's content as of late. There's just so much happening. So I don't mind more of a down period. I would love to see some focus on something like a sequel. And I'm still faithful that things will work out, or I still have faith that things will work out. Anyway, y'all, that is going to do it for today. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you as always for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.